Hey guys, welcome back to Chris and Retro. Tonight's video is a follow-up from a video I did back in May 27th. I dropped a video talking about an incident in New Mexico where a young woman had given birth in a hospital bathroom and put the baby in the trash under plastic, and the baby died. And she was then charged with murder, I believe. I forget what her exact charges were, but she was charged for killing the child. In that video, I made some observations, and my initial commentary was not only just about her situation and what she did, but also noticing weird behaviors by the mother and odd behavior by hospital staff. And it made me really think something just didn't seem right about that whole scene. And I noted it. And this video is really going to be a follow-up video to that. Now, I'm not sure, like most of the content on here, pretty much all the content on here, I try to leave us with some kind of a cautionary message. I guess in this one, as I go through it, when you're hearing people be the center of the situation, so regardless of whatever it is, she's still going through trial, and I'll get into all that. One of the things is there's usually multiple versions of the story and angles, and what all I'm trying to do is present another angle and also raise some questions about generally what I'm seeing in New Mexico, but specifically with this hospital. And so I'm not minimizing what she did, and I can't imagine a scenario where she didn't do it. She's clearly on the hook for this and should be. So whatever happens to her, that's whatever. This is not really about that so much as it's about the hospital and the behavior on the hospital and what often happens. Now, you hear me talk about stigma and healthcare on here. I did a clip on it. I've talked about it throughout different shows. I do presentations with Shatterproof talking about stigma and healthcare relative to how they treat people in recovery. Actually, the American College of Emergency Physicians, as I mentioned in a couple of videos ago, had us on a panel talking about that, where the physicians were eagerly trying to find ways to improve medical conditions relative to stigma. So I think there's a lot to this. And when I look at hospitals and when I start seeing some earmarks of some trouble, they are red flags. And I think that part of this show is to call some of that stuff out too. So sounds a little messy the way I did this intro, but I'll start walking through it with you. I think the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start by playing a clip from the original footage that shared my initial suspicions about what was going on here. And I will share that with you guys momentarily here. Now, when this whole thing started, I was suspicious of the behavior of the charge nurse. Was my first red flag. There was other things that's like, how the heck could this happen? That was sort of there. But the immediate defensiveness and decisiveness about the guilt of this patient and what she had done and the details in which she was the one doing all this stuff, I felt like was overcompensation. And immediately I'm like, well, why are you being so adamant about this? If it's so obvious, then just chill and let it happen, let it play out over time. So I just felt like it was massively defensive, and I couldn't figure that one out. So I will play that clip for you now. So I started working her up. The other person across the wall, the male in this video, is the charge nurse. Many of them do by their role just because of the gravity of their role. And he's already indicated that his first comment, as I was yapping, was that she tested positive pregnant when she came in.
Finally, we got her to open the door, and there was blood everywhere. She put the baby in the trash can, and then she put another clean liner over the top of it.
Okay, so as we're coming into this video, all of us are seeing the headline. That's disgusting. That's atrocious. However, the charge nurse has initiating the conversation to say that they knew she was pregnant. I want to know what pregnant person that's at full term, that's in a hospital, is going to be let to just wander through the hospital and go into a restroom unattended. I can't think of a situation that would be allowed. So I start off with concerns about the hospital's position on this whole thing and why they got so defensive. That didn't make a lot of sense to me. And so I'm going to zoom out for a minute and talk. I'm going to talk about the context of the cases here. So about 250 miles away, 7 months prior to this, Albuquerque, New Mexico, there was a 19-year-old girl, and her name was Alexis Avila. And Alexis, at 19 years old, had dumped her newborn child in a dumpster and left it there. Somebody, I believe, based on the characterization, was probably homeless people looking for food, heard this baby rustling and crying still, very below temperature, but still alive, and they rushed the child into a hospital setting in Albuquerque. The child lived. But the Alexis got, I believe, an 18-year sentence reduced to 16 because of her mental health condition. But she got an 18-year sentence and is currently serving. And so that happened in January of 2022. And by May of 23, that quick, she's in prison. And she's in there for, I believe, 16 years. Attempted murder is what she got charged with. That was 250 miles away 7 months earlier. Fast forward, in March of 2023, a person dropped off a baby at this Artesia Hospital, the same hospital that's of the case I was presenting, dropped off a baby there that died. An unknown person dropped this baby off at this hospital and the baby died. No other details around it, which I found another just very suspicious to me, how they have no knowledge of a person dropping a child off at this hospital and it dies. I found that odd. The reason I brought up the Albuquerque case, it was 250 miles away, and I bring up this one is because in the news there was a lot of correlation between the two stories, and I think that really it ends just in some coincidence because of their names and because of their age and the fact that it was both in New Mexico, because I think that Albuquerque happened quicker just because it's a larger city, and I'll show you why. But anyway, the first person in Albuquerque, her name was, like I said, Alexis Avila, and she's 19. And then the person that is in the video that I originally covered was Alexi Treviso, also 19. So I thought that was kind of interesting that, you have these cases that are all consistent, but two of them are at Artesia General Hospital. That didn't make any, that seems odd to me when I start looking at behavior and when I start seeing a charge nurse be so defensive. I start to really wonder what's going on there. So just to give some context on where Artesia is, I want to share with you guys where this hospital is on the landscape of the world. So I don't know if you can see this, but in the middle here, the very middle dot is Artesia General Hospital. Now, as you travel down south is Carlsbad Medical Center, and then up north is Eastern New Mexico Medical Group. You go out to the east, Norley Hospital, and at the border, you have Hobbs Hospital. And then if you go all the way across by the Air Force Base, they have a Presbyterian Medical Center. So, but it's not close. So Artesia, probably the closest one was Carlsbad Medical Center as an alternative location. However, if you looked in the left-hand side here and you start looking at ratings, this is another thing I look at is in terms of what the community thinks about this hospital. And Artesia has barely 3 stars. It's 2.5 stars as a rating. The other hospitals in the area, even Hobbs Hospital, which is a rural hospital literally on the border of Texas and New Mexico, out in the middle of nowhere, still has a better rating. Norley has almost a 4-star rating. Loveless Regional in Roswell, 4-star. Lincoln County, 3-star. But they're, these hospitals, Carlsbad, the one that's close, is 4.5 stars. So the reason I'm pointing that out is because these other hospitals, with equal conditions around them, being rural, not a lot of resources, probably limited employment population in the area, they don't seem to have the same problems. Now, as I dug deeper, I'm like, okay, well, that's odd that they're getting poor performance in their reviews. And even some of the reviews, if you read, even as of last week, they're talking about how incredibly unfriendly the staff is and how they never would want to go there again. So now you're starting to speak of a culture within the hospital. So you've got these random baby dropped off dead. You've got a known pregnant person they acknowledge was pregnant even in the initial scene with law enforcement there, that is allowed to go out of her room to have her baby in the bathroom. I can't think of a scenario that a pregnant woman is allowed to wander through a hospital without an attendant. I don't understand any situation where that would be allowed. So I'm already saying there's all kinds of shady. So then I dug even deeper. I'm like, okay, well, has this hospital ever been sued for anything? Well, yeah, it has. And so I will share that with you here shortly. We'll switch over screens on this one. And I have one other thing that I want to share with you on this. And so this was a different lawsuit. So this was not a malpractice lawsuit. This was actually an employment law lawsuit. And it was specific to family leave, the Family Leave Act. So Kimberly Harris and Angela Steelman were plaintiffs against the governing board of Artesia General Hospital. And what they're alleging as you go through this, there was cases where they should have been allowed to be out on family leave, and instead were given more hours to work. And when they couldn't work those hours, generally, and I'm characterizing, I'm sure there's more details about this. And if I'm misrepresenting, it's not intentional by any means. It's just the general speaking of this. If you go through the case, and you can find it online, is that they basically did not honor their family leave rights of the employees, and the employees won the lawsuit. So they had somebody that was allowed family leave. They wouldn't grant it at first, and also because of a disability was only supposed to be working part-time based on doctor's advice in writing, and they made this person work full-time when the person finally said, I can't do this, and left on family leave. When they returned, they were terminated immediately, and that's what was the impetus for the lawsuit being awarded to the plaintiffs. So, generally speaking, the reason I share all this is that my initial concern relative to this hospital and its function in this one case, the observations were they're clearly trying to cover themselves all the time. And why is that? What is going on? And so I think it's a question that's worth asking. And so when you find yourself and your loved ones in these situations, the woman Alexi Treviso that made the decision to go in the bathroom, have her child, and leave it in a trash can, that's not defendable. And I'm not here to defend her. And honestly, I think she should get anything that comes to her, because, she's out living her life as can be afterwards. And this is what a decision was made. Now, it did bring other questions. The mother clearly knew. She was acting like she didn't know in the video, like, I can't believe you're pregnant. But then at the same time is talking about how in that video I showed, but you go back and watch the original ones, you can hear her in there saying, I told you this is what happens to women that do this type of thing. I forget how she characterized it. But the mother clearly knew. The hospital obviously knew. They said they knew she was pregnant. And yet still all of them allowed her to go in this bathroom and deal with things this way. The same hospital that only months earlier had had a dead baby at the door in March that year, and this happened in August. So only a few months earlier in the same year, they had a mysterious death of another baby, and no account of anything with it. As far as I know, still pending. It makes me pause. When we've got loved ones that go through this stuff, I'm not saying go after medical facilities at all, because I really, I worked at a local hospital here, and the people there were wonderful, and they really were working hard. I think healthcare in and of itself through the pandemic went through a tremendous amount of strain unnecessarily, and employees are in cut budgets and at maximum hours and no pay increases, and honestly, it's a thankless line of work. But I have to say that something sounds like it's coming from the top down in this hospital, and it's concerning. It just is to me, from an entire country away from where they are. I'm in the Northeast, and I've never even been in this area. I just thought it was odd. As a side, I wonder what's going on in New Mexico in general. I mean, I have a vested interest in New Mexico just because we do in my professional life. New Mexico is really important to my professional life based on work I do. But I wonder, what's going on there relative to some of the other things I'm hearing about. Putting aside, Second Amendment rights for citizens, alleging that that's because of the number one cause of death in ages 1 to 19 is gun violence. Well, I would argue that most of those are probably in the 16 to 19 people that are in the street playing tough, big boy games with guns without even thinking about the consequence. I can't imagine there's a lot of 1-year-olds dying, but they're playing a lot of election year politics, and then they're seeing policy changes and stuff like that. And then yet you have a hospital here that clearly has something else going on and is not being, there's no intervention in that at all. But yet, citizens with legal guns cannot have them. So I just found that as an odd context given everything else that's going on there. I guess, I always try to leave with some kind of advice on things, but this was more of just a follow-up on a video that I'd already kind of like, that's odd. And then all of a sudden, these months later, I find out that my assumption was correct. There is something odd there. So just in somewhat of a closure on the situation with the baby and the girl there, she's currently going through her trial right now. I don't believe there's been a sentencing, or I don't believe that she's been found guilty or innocent of anything yet. There's a lot of question about the hospital being complicit or even negligent in their handling of her. So it's delaying the case quite a bit. And that's why it's not wrapping up as fast as the first one did in Albuquerque. That was more cut and dry. That was somebody dumping somebody in a dumpster, and it was on camera. that's cut and dry. This one has a lot of nuance to it, but there is one video that shows her just clearly leaving the room, hustling down the hall, going in the bathroom, and dealing with this thing. So, you know, she's still in trial. We don't know where that's going to land. But what is interesting is that there is a separate civil lawsuit to the hospital, separate from this other one. There's another lawsuit against the hospital about this case, alleging some version of negligence. And I don't have all the details of it, but they're alleging that they had a role of negligence in this whole thing happening. And it really, and I think it's probably a defensive posture, but it may in fact be awarded, depending on how things go. It was pretty obvious to me from the beginning. There was a reason why they were being so defensive. I mean, the charge nurse was very detailed outlining why she was guilty and how she killed her baby, when that would have been, that's an overreach at best based on the information that was available at the time. When we have our loved ones in these situations, regardless if they find themselves on the wrong side of the law, have done something wrong or not, there's always more to this story. And when, as a population around a healthcare institution like this, it happens to make me pause for a second. And how would they treat me in active use? How would they treat my loved ones if they're struggling with addiction and they come in there 4 and 5 different times? You know, I've had multiple guests in this show that if they went in this hospital, would they even be treated correctly? I don't know. Based on what I'm seeing so far, that's probably the last place I'd ever want to go. Unless it was an absolute medical emergency and I couldn't get anywhere else. I'm sure there's plenty of hospitals across the country that are very similar to this, but at some point, these things got to be stopped being looked at as one-off. At some point, it has to be looked at the totality of what actually is going on in this place. And I wouldn't even be covering it on the channel had I not initially covered the fact this 19-year-old had been involved in the situation she had been in. And I got curious in the follow-up. When I got curious in the follow-up, all those red flags started to become blazing red and flying high. There's a lot more there, and I'm sure that we'll find a lot more that will come out of this before it's all said and done. I guess in some ways this illustrates my point about high-risk living. This hospital has been functioning basically as king of the sea for a long time, it sounds like, with their behavior with employees, how they treat their clients and patients, and now this situation of multiple deaths of children in that hospital. It just makes me ask the question, what's going on? You know, what is going on over there? Guys, I hope that you find this video informational. It was a follow-up video, something I'd already done. I'm certainly not intentionally harming anybody at Artesia General Hospital, but I think somebody over there has got to be accountable for the clear, protracted season of things that shouldn't happen to a well-run institution that are caring for people. So if these things are happening this many times, this prominent, how many times are things happening there that nobody knows about because either it's a disadvantaged population and they don't care, or what's going on there? I think it's at least worth the question, especially when you look at hospitals all in the area based on patient population are in the 3-star range, and the only one that was even close to these guys in rating is Hobbs, and it's out in the middle of nowhere on the Texas and New Mexico border. I would imagine they probably have struggles having good health care there. But I've never been there, so it's probably a leap, but sometimes I guess correctly. Guys, thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe. I'm looking to get my subscribers count rolling again here, and I genuinely appreciate your support. Until the next time we talk, please stay out of trouble.